Former cheaters. How were you caught by your significant other? I returned to town a day early and planned to surprise my partner at work. Instead, I found him having an intimate moment with another secretary. He didn't notice me, so I took a quick photo and quietly left. I went home and called my friends and family. He came over and helped me pack up all his belongings and change the locks. I dropped his stuff off at his mother's house. I sent him the picture of him and the other woman and let him know that he and his things were now at his mother's place. The house was in my name and all the documents were mine. He never received mail there. He lived paycheck to paycheck and I paid all the bills, so I wasn't sure what he spent his money on. He spent the next few weeks pleading with me to take him back. He bothered my friends, showed up on my job, and even made a scene in front of the house. Eventually, he got tired and stopped. I have no idea what happened to him after that. I haven't seen or heard from him since. So her ex thought he could two-time her with the office secretary? Classic case of spreadsheets turning into spreadsheets. Guess he wasn't prepared for the audit of a lifetime. Story 2. Another story, not mine but my wife's. We started drifting apart and we had planned a trip to visit my grandparents who live in another state. A month before the trip, she told me she wanted to cancel it and go to a family reunion on her side in a different state, and she wanted to go alone without the kids. I thought it was strange because wouldn't you want to introduce your kids to a family they've never met? Since we were growing distant, I just said, okay, fine, go. Maybe some time apart would be good for us. She came back and suddenly wanted to move across the country for a hospital job offered by a distant aunt. She didn't even ask if I was willing to move. I told her to do what she needed to be happy, but she couldn't take the kids. After a few days, she realized she couldn't leave without seeing the kids, so she begged for my forgiveness. I forgave her. Over the next month, we grew even more distant than before. I had lunch at work and decided to go home. When I got home, no one was there, so I looked through her computer. I found pictures of her with a man she met in Zynga Poker who lived in the state where her supposed family reunion was. I've never had a panic until that day. I thought I was having an emergency and had to call my neighbor to sit with me. I took pictures of everything I found. Other pictures, emails, and Facebook messages. I waited until the kids were in bed and showed her all the evidence I'd gathered. It was not a pleasant day. I guess the only reunion your wife was interested in was the one with Mr. Zynga Poker Stud. Hope he has a better poker face than she did. Story 3. My ex, many years ago, was not very smart. She knew that I had many friends who lived in the same neighborhood as her ex, whom she had left a couple of months before dating me. She always told me she was going to a friend's house to study. I had no reason not to believe her, until one day she wouldn't answer a single text. I'm not the kind of person to text a lot. I'll text you, and if you don't reply, maybe I'll text you again 2 to 3 hours later to make sure you got my last message. If you still don't answer, then I'll just talk to you when you feel like it. So, I was at my friend's house later that night, having not gotten a reply from her in maybe 12 hours. My friends and I decided to go outside and make a barbecue in his backyard, and I noticed her car in the driveway of the house behind us. I didn't know it was her ex's house, but it was the wrong neighborhood for her friend's house. I called her sister and asked, "Where's your sister?" She said, "Oh, she's at Stacy's house." Well, I must be seeing things because I'm looking at her car right now, and this isn't Stacy's neighborhood. Her response was, So I hung up and asked my friend who lived in the house we were at, "Who owns the house behind you?" He said, "Oh, that's Jake's house." I called her phone, but it was off, so I just enjoyed the rest of my time there and didn't worry about it anymore. It was clear that the situation was what it was. About 2 hours later, I got a call from her saying her phone was on silent for study purposes and asked if I wanted to come over. I said, sure. I arrived at the house a little later and she got into the car. As soon as she shut the door, I asked, "How was studying with Stacy's?" She gave me a made-up answer, not knowing I was aware of the truth. After she finished lying, I said, "That's strange. It must have been a long walk from Jake's house." I made sure to watch her face as I said it to see her reaction. She knew I knew but wouldn't admit it. Here's a summary of our conversation. We were just talking things out. Why would it be okay to go there to do that if you have a boyfriend? What needs to be talked about? We've been friends for a long time before dating. I just can't stop talking to him. So you thought it was logical to lie to me about going to Stacy's house? It's 11 p.m. and you've been talking it out since 10 a.m. I tried to reach you a couple of times too. What did you guys do? She wouldn't answer or look at me. I told her to get out of the car and drove off. She had broken up with him the first time because he was dangerous and didn't seem to want to improve himself. About a year after I drove off, she called me, asking if we could try and make it work again and if I'd like to get together for dinner. I said yes and arranged a date at a nice restaurant for Saturday at 8 p.m. I told her about the dress code since it was a fancy place. I'm not sure how long she waited because I didn't go. Her wanting to try again with a fancy dinner date after everything that happened shows she might not fully grasp the weight of the situation. It's like trying to fix a broken vase with just a smile and a sorry. It's not enough to make it whole again. Story 4. I lost my job because the company closed, and my wife panicked. She said she needed a long vacation to clear her mind. She wanted to go alone and got her parents to buy her a ticket to Europe for a month. I supported her decision, thinking it would be good for her to have time to herself and reflect. I was sure she'd feel better after some time away. Our relationship got worse while we waited for her trip, so I thought she needed her space sooner. I started sleeping in her guest room apartment above the garage. One day while she was at work, I went to the house and noticed a new webcam on her computer. I turned on the computer and checked her email, only to find out she was planning to meet a guy in Europe. They'd been exchanging explicit photos and writing romantic scenarios about their first meeting, which included some encounters. These scenarios ended with them making marriage vows, even planning to sign a love contract. All this time, she had just said she needed a break and time to find herself, but now I knew she was planning to be unfaithful to me in Europe. It was much worse than I thought. She wasn't the woman I believed I was married to. I've hired a divorce lawyer and I'm moving forward with ending our marriage. I don't want her back at all. She can deal with the consequences of her actions. We've been married for 8 years and I've been the most loving and devoted husband possible. This betrayal has left me needing therapy because I'm afraid I won't be able to trust anyone ever again. Story 5. I wasn't the unfaithful one, but I was the other guy in the situation. I met this girl and we were both very interested in each other. We started dating. I went to a convention and she was there with her friends. I met a guy who was a bit too touchy. She said he was a friends with benefits and pulled him aside, supposedly to tell him to stop because she wanted to date me seriously. She seemed to do that and he seemed okay with it. We played Street Fighter and I shook the guy's hand. He seemed nice. What I didn't know was that they had been together for about 4 to 5 years, and he was planning to propose to her. I remained unaware for about 6 months. The guy wasn't around much, he was from another state. It wasn't until I met her friends that people kept mentioning this guy. I started to understand the situation. None of her social media at the time showed this serious relationship, and she was even on several dating apps. She found my profile on one and flirted with me as a joke. I tried to fix things for a while, but it didn't work. One of her best friends and roommates eventually told him about us sleeping together, and everything went up. To make matters worse, when I ended things with her, she started looking for me intensely. One time, after lying to me about telling him the truth while intoxicated, she forced herself on me after we took things too far. It was awful. After that, I tried to end things permanently, but she wouldn't accept no for an answer and kept the other guy involved from a distance. Surprisingly, most of her friends initially supported me. They'd known her for years, but it seemed she had a history of crazy behavior. For a while, I had a great group of supportive friends. When I finally managed to remove all ties with her, everything changed. She befriended my roommates and started spreading rumors about me. She convinced many people that I was the one creeping her and even got engaged to the other guy. She won back most of her friends. As a result, I was isolated on campus, lost my apartment, and became homeless because university officials and other students initially sided with her without investigating. Thankfully, I live in a state where only one party's consent is needed to record conversations. And I had recorded everything and archived all my chats with her and these people. That was a year ago, and thanks to some kind people and the fact that I'd recorded everything, I managed to stay out of trouble. I recently went public about the harm I've suffered from her. Things are slowly improving, and I now have a stable shelter. I have a lot of trouble trusting people now. I don't know if I can ever be in a close relationship the same way again. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 6. My brother discovered that his wife was acting suspiciously with her phone, constantly hiding it and receiving frequent texts. Curious, he looked into it and found out that a man had been texting her for several months. She claimed she needed to stay home over the weekend to catch up on homework. My brother and I were supposed to go on a hunting trip, but instead we stayed at my house until it got dark and then drove back to his neighborhood in my neighbor's car. She sent him a picture of herself at home, saying she was going to bed early that night. However, we saw a car parked down the street, and a man walked to the house and let himself in. My brother was furious and wanted to confront the man. I calmed him down and suggested he think about the long-term consequences. We sneaked up to the house and used a night vision camera to record them together in the living room. My brother wanted to confront the man, who was her coworker, but I did something controversial and called the police, claiming there was a lot of yelling coming from the house to prevent any potential conflict. The police arrived, took statements, and we left. The next day, my brother accessed her iMessages through her email account and consulted with a lawyer. We provided the lawyer with the messages, and when we returned from our hunting trip 5 days later, he called her out to see something impressive. When she came out, he handed her divorce papers and asked her to leave the house. She had the police stand by while she collected her belongings a few days later. The house was his before they got married, so she only kept some items they had bought together in her car. They had no children, and the prenup ensured she wouldn't receive alimony, as he earned significantly more than her. The man she was involved with had a criminal record. We saw her a few months later and she tried to talk to my wife, expressing that she missed my brother and was sorry. Her relationship with the other man ended shortly after the divorce. Story 7. My wife had been acting distant for a while. I'd been married for 5 years, getting married at a young age. I started to suspect something was wrong when she stopped being intimate with me. We took a romantic trip to Florida, a month into her distant behavior, which was in October. We never were intimate during the vacation, and alarm bells started ringing loudly for me. I began watching her actions and noticing passive-aggressive comments. I asked her who she was texting, and she said, "A security guard at work is my friend. He asked for my opinion on how his bedroom was decorated." I thought it was inappropriate, and it led to a big fight. For 2 months, we talked for 2 or 3 hours every night about what was wrong with our relationship. It was always my fault, never anything she had done. I finally confronted her, telling her I thought she was being unfaithful. For months, she denied it. I trusted my beautiful wife because I loved her so much. In January, she was suddenly fired from work, with no explanation given. I found out through a friend that the security guard had also been fired on the same day. It turned out he had mishandled a guest. My wife defended him, leaving the company open to a lawsuit, so they fired them both. Finally, in the last week of February, I hired a private investigator, or PI. I know it's unethical, but I felt I was out of options. Within half an hour of me leaving for work, she was at his house. The PA detailed their day and spent 6 hours following them. I confronted her that night and she lied about it. I presented the details of their day and her face dropped. I packed my things and left the next morning. It was the hardest decision I ever made, but it was necessary. Her relationship with him lasted 5 months before she kicked him out. It turned out he'd been aggressive, starting a week after we separated. We were separated for 8 months. We both did a lot of reflecting and growing up. I realized I had been a bad husband, and she realized she had been a terrible wife. We spent the next few years focusing on important things in life, like friendship and understanding. We used to fight about chores. Now our only arguments are about which movie to see or where to eat. We've been back together for 5 years and have never been happier. She encouraged me to get my degree, and I encouraged her to get hers, which she will finish in a year. Story 8. My roommate and his high school sweetheart were together for 7 years. They were engaged in buying items for their wedding. She was secretly seeing her ex for 4.5 months. During this time, she took her bridesmaids to choose dresses for the wedding, selected a honeymoon location, and did other things you would do if you were serious about getting married, like buying a house together. One of my roommate's friends saw the fiancé on a date with her high school ex. This guy had been a problem when my roommate and she got first together and had been arguing in high school because of it. The friend told my roommate about the date, and he discovered how long it had been going on and was furious. He was moved out of the house and the relationship ended. Her family came the next day to collect her belongings. Fast forward 8 months. Now I just moved in while my roommates are going to Mexico for a week, since the honeymoon is already paid for. A few years later, I too experienced a disaster. My ex-husband had locked the desktop but left Facebook messages open. I usually used my laptop but needed some documents from the desktop. There, I found conversations about special massages with happy endings with my now ex-friend who was temporarily living with us. I took screenshots, sent them to a secure location, and used them in court during the custody trial. He denied any relationship with the ex-friend until she accidentally got pregnant by him. They're married now, but have major custody of her daughter. There are other reasons why custody is in my favor, but this was significant. Another mistake was announcing his engagement to her on Facebook. I was blocked, but he forgot to block one of my old high school friends on his friends list. That got screenshotted too, and the judge was not pleased with his deception. Forgetting to block someone on Facebook when announcing an engagement is like sending out a public invitation to your own surprise party. The element of surprise is definitely lost. Story 9. My ex-boyfriend told me we had to postpone our plans because his dad, who was in poor health, had a heart attack and was in the hospital. I went to Walmart that evening to buy a Get Well card. There I saw his dad picking up beer and donuts. I left the card on the shelf and walked away. The next morning at work, I told a coworker about it, and she said, "I saw your ex at a margaritas party last night. They were getting a little too close." Things became messy and full of drama. I was moving back to college in a month, so after a few days of emotional turmoil, I let the drama fade away. I was young and felt more stupid for being gullible and betrayed than heartbroken. My second ex, with whom I had a 3-year great relationship and loved deeply, was caught right before I was supposed to graduate from college. A coworker or student of his exposed him. She had over a month's worth of gas receipts, pictures, and messages showing he had taken this girl to Illinois and other places. I ended up not finishing until another semester and still didn't complete my student teaching. I graduated with a general degree in my field. He told me about a girl who worked with him at Olive Garden, calling her a troublemaker who enjoyed breaking couples up. Fast forward about 6 months, he was growing distant, coming home to grab his laptop and study for hours, ignoring me. I planned date nights, but he would sulk or say he had to work. I became depressed, suspicious, and exhausted. I didn't look for evidence, even when he came home late smelling of cigarettes, which he didn't smoke. I found out the week before Thanksgiving that he was cheating. A girl he worked with sent me a message on Facebook with a lot of evidence. She asked me about dinner at an expensive restaurant. thinking I was the one he took. I had no idea what she was talking about, as I had been performing with an orchestra that night and had my senior recital the next night. She finally sent me an email that turned my life upside down. This girl, who was not attractive, uneducated and obviously troubled, had been kicked out of her boyfriend's house and was staying in a rundown motel with my ex. She knew about me, that we were living together, but didn't care. She was pregnant with another man's child, which I found out later. I almost didn't believe it. I confronted him, but he didn't acknowledge much, saying he was trying to keep our relationship stable to avoid a messy divorce. He packed a bag and left, expecting me to wait for him to get whatever was bothering him out of his system. Story 10. I was living in an apartment owned by his parents, who were unaware of the situation. I fell apart completely. Everything in my life was going amazingly, and it all slipped away so quickly. I wasn't rational at the time. The next few months were tough. I took the cats and tried moving back home with my parents, but communication with them was still easy, and he would visit me at work. After several exhausting months, I moved 1,200 miles away and cut off all communication with him, leaving him no way to contact me. 4 years later, he sent me a letter through a Warcraft forum I used to be active on during our relationship. I checked my old email because it was still linked to my account. He explained his thought process, admitting he was self-centered and focused on what he didn't have instead of appreciating what he did. He said he was influenced by this girl and didn't think I would actually leave. He had married someone else and was unhappy, wanting me to come home. I got married to my current husband a month later, not caring about the ex. However, I developed some kind of emotional attachment disorder, which has affected my relationships. It's been about 8 years since all this happened, but it's had lasting impacts. I'm happily married with a family, have a good job, and only think about him when something like this comes up. I still have my cats. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.